This is a panel about the emerging nexus between comics and journalism, having cartoons and comics that not only comment on the news, they also explain it, at least as far as I can tell. We have two people here with us today, Susie Cagle, and reading from her own self-description, Susie Cagle has been tear-gassed, arrested, and nearly run over by police motorcycles, and all for comics. She has drawn reportage from crisis pregnancy centers, medical marijuana rallies, ecological disasters, failed cities, illegally occupied buildings, and anarchist riots, and has also written journalism for The Guardian and The Atlantic. She currently works almost exclusively online, freelancing and crowdfunding her work. Susie graduated from Columbia School of Journalism and lives in Oakland, California, a great place to be a cartoonist. She is joined by Matt Bors. And Matt Bors is an editorial cartoonist who appears regularly at Daily Kos and in papers around the country. In 2012, he won the Herblock Prize and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. He is also editor of CartoonMovement.com. It's a website that publishes editorial cartoons and comics journalism. And here they are, somewhere.
What's happening?
Hi. So we do comics journalism. It's sequential comics, traditional sequential art, telling true stories, and we're going to show you a pretty broad range of that kind of work, both that we've created and that Matt has kind of commissioned and edited. I think we're just going to jump in and kind of get to the pros and cons of this kind of emerging but not so emerging form. This has been around for a long time, but it's kind of going through a little bit of a re-emergence lately. So go ahead.
All right. So I do editorial cartoons. It's kind of mostly what I'm known for, to the extent that anyone knows who I am. But I got involved in doing comics journalism. It's sort of long been a goal and passion of mine to do nonfiction work. So a couple years ago, I got a chance to go to Afghanistan with two other guys. And we traveled through for about a month on our own, and I was just kind of dipping my toes into doing nonfiction work. So I didn't really have any journalistic goals other than I did a series of comics for Cartoon Movement, which was a site starting up out of the Netherlands by a cartoonist named Geert Roerds. He's a Dutch editorial cartoonist. And so this is a piece I did that's about the elections in Afghanistan that were coming up. This is in the summer of 2010. So you can see in the bottom left there's these little symbols. So many people are illiterate that all the candidates have symbols. So there's light bulb candidate, 2 light bulb candidate, 3 light bulbs, almond, pistachio, 2 books, 3 books, and that's how a lot of the people vote. There's even a politician who had a sailboat for their symbol. So Afghanistan is famously landlocked and incredibly poor, and most people don't have TV, so I don't know that many people there had actually ever even seen one. And this is Cartoon Movement, the site I edit. So Geert Roerds handles the editorial cartoons. We publish an editorial cartoon from around the world. We have people in about 90 countries that contribute. So most days we just publish an editorial cartoon, and about once a month we do a piece of comics journalism. And I'm just going to run through some examples of stuff that we've published and kind of showing some different styles people have and different ways that you can use this to tell stories. So this is Sarah Glidden, who is known for her book that came out a year or two ago called How to Understand Israel in 60 Days or Less, which was sort of a memoir of her going to Israel on a birthright trip. And she was on another trip with some reporters through the Middle East about the time that her book came out. So this is about Iraqi refugees living in Syria. At the time, there wasn't a civil war there, but they had one of the largest refugee populations on Earth. And so hers is more straightforward, and the comics I showed you from Afghanistan are the people that are talking are quoted, they're all real, and what's happening is literally happening. This is a piece by Josh Neufeld about two cartoonists he met on a U.S. State Department visit to Bahrain, who ended up being on different sides of the Arab Spring after an uprising occurred in Bahrain. But you see in this one, he's actually talking to you, talking to the reader, so that is obviously not literally happening as he's standing there with the cartoonist, unless he could foresee that he was going to do a cartoon about it. And then, so this is kind of more of a Scott McCloud approach in understanding comics, where he is a narrator that's actually informing the reader that way, and what's being depicted isn't necessarily literally happening. During Occupy, I commissioned a lot of artists from around the country and a couple in Europe too to go to the sites and do sketches about what they were seeing. And this is kind of a really good opportunity to show like what comics journalism could do, because you can just go there immediately, sketch on your own, and put stuff up. And in my experience of doing this at Occupy Portland, people there are kind of very antagonistic towards media, what they view as mainstream media, or people with a television camera, and kind of going in someplace with a sketchbook is an easy way to get people to kind of open up to you and talk to you and just see you as another person, not necessarily a member of the media. We just finished publishing this piece called Army of God, which is by David Axe and Tim Hamilton. David Axe has been to most war zones on the planet, and this is about Democratic Republic of Congo and the LRA. So it's about a 95-page graphic novel, and each chapter is from a different perspective of people he interviewed there. So one chapter is a priest that works as a missionary. Another chapter is a young woman who was abducted by the LRA. Another is a local school teacher, and then there's a point of view of international diplomacy from Hillary Clinton's perspective is given, and then there's a chapter on the history of Kony himself. So this is a child soldier kind of recounting his tale of how he came into the LRA. And so now that this is, people have been doing this for about 2 years online in a greater capacity, people are starting to incorporate multimedia elements. I think Susie does this a lot and is going to show that later, but I just took some screenshots here to show you. This is a piece by Dan Archer that is a history of the International Criminal Court, and what you do is you scroll through the panels left to right, and then there's kind of supplemental information that you can scroll down to kind of, if you want to go and delve into a subject matter of the panel further. Luke Rattle in Chicago went to the NATO protests and did this comic for us. And you see on the right there you have injuries from the police that he compiled from Twitter. So, and there's links on them so that you click on them and then the actual photo of the person pops up. And so when you're on a page of his comics, that's just one image, you're going to spend a lot of time on it, or not, depending on how deep you want to get into it. But each one of those icons there is an interview that connects to an audio link. So you click on it and you can play it and read along, and then you see in the top right there's a video segment. I think that might be the Democracy Now! Segment that was on this speech, which is these are soldiers that were throwing away their medals. This is a picture from Haiti, right outside the airport last summer. So when I went there to do a comics journalism project, and I kind of I've been interested in Haiti for a while, and I got more interested in the recovery after the earthquake. And I had an idea to go and do some of my own comics journalism. And then it kind of snowballed into this big project where I wanted to hire Haitians to do basically a graphic novel length work about Reconstruction efforts in their country. So we applied for a grant and went down there, me, Jarrett Rords of Cartoon Movement, and colleague Caroline Binns, who's a video journalist, and spent a month down there finding people. And at the time I was there was 600,000 people still living in tent camps. I think the number is about 400,000 now. And that's the National Palace, which was just demolished this week by Sean Penn's charity. And there's me with Martha Stewart, who I met in Haiti, and we're having a discussion about her work there and how much I like it. So we found a bunch of different journalists, and we found a cartoonist who was already doing work down there, Chevelin Pierre, who is a really great cartoonist. And then all the journalists we got are professional journalists. The first guy here, Ferris Jerome, works for Le Nouveliste, which is the biggest daily in Haiti. And Chevelin draws this paper, which could be described as maybe an info comic in Haiti called Chemin Lacaille, which means the way home. And it tells people how to, avoid cholera or something like that. And it'll be done in a comic form in Creole, because the media there basically serves the French-reading population. And since most people, they speak Creole and French, most people don't read French, though. So vast swaths of the population aren't able to read the newspapers and couldn't buy them even if they could read them. So things like Chemin Lacaille are printed by the UN, and they print about 100,000 copies. So to give you an idea, the big dailies there have about, this is a city of 9 million. Le Nouveliste has, on any day, from 9,000 to 12,000 papers that they're printing. So hardly anyone's reading it. This little comic publication is, from everything I could tell, the most widely read thing in the country. And everybody knew about this guy. So this is the first comic that we did, which was kind of, it's called Tents Beyond Tents, playing off the theme Mountains Beyond Mountains about Haiti. That was kind of catching everyone up to what's going on there. And they actually have cleared this out since we published it a year ago, but the plaza in front of the National Palace was home to about 60,000 people living in camps for over a year and a half. And this is a pic of the sketches that Chevelin sends me. I have a little more of showing the process later in this. But these are some screenshots from a video I did with Caroline Binns, and this kind of showcases, one of the things that you can do with comics journalism, which is keep people anonymous. So this video is called Haiti's Scapegoats. So in the aftermath of the earthquake, you had a lot of people blaming the earthquake on gay people. It's basically Pat Robertson times 10. So we're talking about a country that doesn't have any support basically for gay and lesbians, and so they face an incredible amount of discrimination. It's still a place where you don't want to, in most places, don't want to come out to your family. So these people were willing to talk to us if we hid their identity, and kind of explaining to them what we were doing through comics and video was difficult, but I showed this one guy this, which is how I planned to draw him in a comic and hiding his identity, which is putting the speech bubble over his face. And once I showed him that, he was completely cool with it. So this is how the video ended up. I never ended up doing a comic because kind of editing this project consumed me, but this is shots from the video. And this is his mother and his sister, who live with him in a tent no wider than this set of chairs, and don't know that he's gay, and think that we're just there to talk about life in the tent camp, which we are. But and the artist Chevelin Pierre had this, which is Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, which is a French version that someone bootlegged. They copied it on a copy machine in France and mailed it to him. So he referred to this as his Bible. And we're thinking about different ways to approach all these different comics we want to do. So we're doing a chapter on every aspect of the recovery. So the next one is about NGOs and the power that they have in Haiti. So we kind of wanted to do an explanation for people. So the journalist here, Robinson Jaffard, is doing this, that says Understanding NGOs in Haiti. So it's basically, with a nod to Scott McCloud's comics, the journalist is actually inside the comic narrating it to people. So what we do for this is we bang out a script. This is the final version. And there's a lot of back and forth through translators because I don't speak French or Creole. So we come up with a script like this, which I don't know if you can read from out there, but he's talking about how much money that poured into Haiti after the earthquake went to different NGOs and how much of it went to Haiti. So here he's physically dumping it into a change machine and crawling through the money, and we don't have the final numbers in there, but he's detailing that 824 million of it went to private donors, UN agencies, Red Cross, and then he says that's the amount that he's standing on there represents the amount that went to Haiti, which is 1% went to the Haitian government. Well, 99% of it went to other outlets. So that's what I have to show from the stuff I've done, and Susie's going to go and talk about some of her work.
So before I was cartooning, I was a freelance journalist writing articles. And so I would come up with an idea for an article, pitch it, and tailor that pitch to the outlet that I was pitching it to. And I've really approached comics journalism in exactly the same way. I've worked for a whole lot of people, and each thing that I do really does look different depending on the client. So this was something that I did for Campus Progress, a website, and it's about for-profit education. And I kind of call these info comics. It's kind of a mashup between an infographic. It's got infographic elements. They're different. This is like a little part of a very long kind of infinite canvas scrolling piece. And there's parts that demystify money and statistics, and then those are mashed up with more cartoony and funny things about a really not funny situation in America. This is kind of the same sort of approach, the kind of info comic thing. This is a piece I did about Stockton, California, which recently declared bankruptcy. Had been troubled for a really long time. I actually went to Stockton and drew a lot of stuff from spending the day there, and then also did a lot of research. I think when people see this kind of work, again, this is a little chunk from a very long scrolly piece, which is often how I do this stuff because it reads so well on the web. This was intimately fact-checked. And I think that sometimes when people look at this stuff, they just presume that maybe it's made up. They presume we've hit a wall is just too good of a quote. It can't be true. And they presume those numbers are just so freaking awful. They must be exaggerated. And this was actually the fact-checking process was the most stringent that I'd ever been through, and I actually really welcomed it. I thought it was great. For a while I did, I called these editorial comics. I feel like we're always coming up with different phrases for how we want to talk about this stuff. But this was a weekly strip I did for a local San Francisco news site. Again, a little chunk from a long scrolly thing. And it was really, it was like a week in review that was pulling together original reporting, aggregated other people's reporting, and also had an editorial comment. This is about the city's totally dysfunctional bus and train system. that had like hit an old woman that week. That's probably the best description for most of my approach is that even when I am doing a whole lot of reporting, I always do have an editorial comment on my work. This is another local San Francisco chunk of a long scrolly thing about the history of the Beta Breakers race there. Less controversial. So this is a piece that I did under Matt's editorship at Cartoon Movement, and also a testament to the power of comics journalism and what you can do with it that you can't do with other mediums. I went undercover to faith-based crisis pregnancy centers all around the Bay Area, and I used fake names, I surreptitiously recorded things, and I took a lot of notes and did sketches while I was there. When you go into these crisis pregnancy centers, you sign a contract saying that you will not take pictures and not take video, and it's a private, very personal thing. I mean, this is, I'm in these rooms one-on-one with a counselor telling me not to get an abortion, and it's not a situation. I feel like these have been in the news so much, but people were talking about them very generally and without much knowledge of what this was actually like, what it was actually like to go there, what it was actually like to be in these situations with these therapists who were telling women not to get abortions, and also giving them actually completely wrong medical advice. And this comic actually ended up sparking the San Francisco district attorney to investigate this particular chain of crisis pregnancy centers further. So shortly after I finished that comic, Occupy started, and I live in Oakland, and about a mile away from the downtown site where this happened in front of City Hall, and people were writing articles about it, and I was looking at this and saying, why the hell would you write an article about this extremely visual spectacle? It was a spectacle. I mean, this doesn't even give you a sense of how massive this was. And if I thought this was a spectacle, little did I know that it was going to turn into this, which I was in the middle of, and then it was going to turn into this, and this, and this. This is me out reporting shortly before I was arrested for the second time. I thought, in the beginning when it was all calm and we weren't getting tear gassed in the face, I was often drawing in these situations. Even if there was like 10 minutes of calm, I would pull out a sketchbook and be able to draw police on the police line in riot gear. But things were so crazy that I was often tweeting basically my notes that then I could make public and make it into a news stream for people, because especially on this day, there were maybe, there were 1,000 people in the street trying to take over a building, and it was a crazy situation, and there were a handful of reporters at best. And so I kind of unwittingly became this primary hard news source for information that was going on in Oakland. And that really confused people because, but wait, you're a cartoonist. They didn't know what to do with that. That's what they said when they arrested me the first time. Oh, you're the cartoonist. They're taking you to jail. But sometimes I do get to draw in the field. This is at a much more calm rally. That little puffball there is my audio recorder, because I also take a whole lot of audio recording, and I'm going to show you a little bit of what I've done with that. But these are some of the sketches that I did on site, actually at a raid of an illegal building occupation in San Francisco. This was a really interesting situation because there was one other reporter that even went into the building. I was totally breaking the law. I was trespassing. I could have been arrested in that situation, but I wasn't. And the occupiers were not allowing anyone to take any pictures in really large areas. They were saying no one takes pictures. And this has been a controversy throughout the Occupy movement. With everyone having a cell phone camera now, a lot of people have taken to live streaming everything all the time. And that includes a lot of illegal acts by people in these situations, including this building takeover. Everyone was committing a crime by even being there, and they wanted as little evidence as possible. But I said, well, can I draw? And they said, oh, sure, you can draw, that's fine. So I did about 10 or 15 sketches into the wee hours of the morning of things like this, which there were just no photos of this ever came out. No one ever saw it. But most of my Occupy art, the work product that came out of it was I was writing articles for places like The Guardian and The Atlantic, but I was also doing these paintings for Truthout. I actually crowdfunded about $6,000 that allowed me to do this work. I had sold a lot of original art and prints and sketches, and people just gave me large donations because they felt like this was unique and that no one else was providing this kind of stuff. I really liked the way that I presented this is, again, a whole lot of white space and one image taking up the width of the web frame at a time, so you're really forced to look at one of these images at a time. And it's surrounded by white space, which these situations, I mean, this is so boiled down and really has been cartoonified to an extent, especially by negating a lot of the surrounding space. And I felt like that was really necessary to, it actually gives you a little bit more of a sense of what it's like being there, because in these really frantic situations, I call it like it's live action role playing war zone. It's not actually a war zone, but it's people kind of playing at it.
The next best thing.
Yeah. And your perception of it and your memory of it are really in these kinds of images that are surrounded by white space. You don't remember all of the peripherals. You don't remember the entire thing. It's these little snaps. But next, I believe, is a video that I put together using a whole lot of my the field recordings and interviews that I've done around Occupy, and it's Occupy Oakland in 1 minute.
People that wear black, that hide their faces, and exert violence, the only ones I've seen so far are the fucking police. It's a lot more violent to foreclose on somebody and throw them out of a house than throw a rock through a window.
Whether the police do it to them or they do it, both sides need to stop.
I don't want to be a peaceful protester. That's like a boring thing to do. Why would I go then? I'm not saying why because I'm going to smash something, but just like I don't like why. I don't like why do I have to do that for you?
Compared to the rest of the country, Oakland is still on fire.
Oakland is still on fire, but not every day anymore. But sometimes it's on fire like this. This is a piece that I did again for Matt at Cartoon Movement about the medical marijuana industry and kind of fight that's happening on the entire West Coast, but especially centered in Oakland. And this was a really fun project. I had a lot of fun with this, and it started because actually kind of came out of Occupy, which was this initial raid on a dispensary and marijuana growing school in downtown Oakland, which I've kind of become accustomed to running toward the fire, ready to draw. And so I heard like, ooh, raid downtown, and went right there with my sketchbook and with my recorder. And so this is the first page of that piece, and I can't show you, but as you see that little megaphone icon in the piece on cartoon movement, I've used this kind of consumer website called ThingLink, where you can upload images and easily tag them with links or little boxes, little note boxes, or with audio and video. And I've used it to pair my still images with my field audio, because I'm really passionate about producing the field audio, and I think that they make this really interesting pair. So this is you get this sense of DEA go away a little bit of what this crowd was like, but they were smashing windows, they were jumping on cars. It was quite a scene, and I feel like the audio and the image really mash up well. And then this is, again, another page from that piece of the power of comics journalism. I was able to interview a marijuana grower who is gets top rates in Oakland for his work, and would not go on the record. It's a dangerous profession, not necessarily because of law enforcement. I mean, I'm not going to read all this stuff, but because of robbers in town who will find out and come and steal your stuff and potentially kill you. And this actually, shortly after this came out, a marijuana grower in Oakland shot and killed an armed burglar, and the police were fine with it. No problem. So this is a little bit of a piece that I did for Symbolia magazine. It's a new iPad magazine of illustrated journalism. Not all comics journalism, but journalism with images paired with it. I went to the Salton Sea in Southern California, which is an impending ecological disaster and former resort town. And it was like comics journalist dream come true. I mean, if I thought that medical marijuana rally was great, this was even better. And these pages again will be it's only available on iPad, but it'll have audio. Like on this page, there's a 40-second interview that I like the idea of you're forced to listen to the audio and it's not there in words for you to read. So that'll be out in October, and it's really, I think it's exciting for this whole, re-emergence of the form that that something like this is existing and getting grant money and getting eyeballs. People are interested in what's happening with it. And I think that we're starting to get beyond these questions that we're probably going to talk about now about issues of how accurate and how truthful can you be? You're drawing this cartoon of this thing. Is it fair to draw a cartoon of the guy who has an armchair in the riot? Is that a fair depiction? Is that a truthful depiction? Or do we need a photo of that to know that happened? So I believe that is my last slide.
Random applause, please. One of the questions we always get, we've done a few of these panels now at different places, and people always ask about, accuracy and how truthful is it, or how you're exaggerating. And I think you could see maybe from the comics that I showed, I mean, they're tending more towards the realistic side, but there's a range in there of ones that are more photorealistic and ones that are cartoony. I mean, some people might say that Susie's work is more cartoony, I think, compared to some of the other ones. But to me, I don't find it problematic in any way. I think like cartoony to me is like Garfield cartoony. And if you were doing a piece that was supposed to be serious, that was about Occupy Oakland, and characters looked like John from Garfield, I would maybe find that problematic, but I don't. What do you think?
It actually is one of the things that inspired me to start pairing the audio and the drawings together. I was doing audio stories for radio shows and stuff on a freelance basis, and then I thought, hey, wait a second. The audio kind of proves that I was there and that these things are real. And when you're hearing that and looking at a much more stylish visual representation of what happened, I feel like that worked for a lot of people. I feel like once I started doing that, I stopped getting those questions. I was really I was worried about, you can't see it, but the way that I made the marijuana grower anonymous was that I just made his features completely simplistic. Like he had dot eyes and a simple nose and a line mouth.
I know that guy. I bought some weed from him.
And I was kind of concerned about that. I hadn't done that before. And I had audio of the interview, and I really wanted to use it, and he was just like, no, you can't. Like, you have a distinctive voice. People will know that it's me. And I was kind of worried, but I didn't have an issue. Nobody seemed to have a problem with that at all. And I feel like maybe in part that's because I've been doing this. I do still do a lot of writing as well. But this is probably the majority of my work and my income. This is my living. And I think that because I've been doing this for a couple of years, me personally, but also the medium has a lot more credibility than it did not that long ago.
Well, with audio recording, that's interesting because the Haiti video I did, so we used different names and we hide their faces, but it's audio of them speaking. And these are people who are living in tents with their families who they're not out to, and they could easily be identified that way. But I mean, they knew that their family is living in a tent without internet access. They're not going to find themselves on an English language site looking at this video. Mm-hmm. So they viewed that as like a very acceptable risk, like that it just was not going to come out. But so talking about accuracy, it's, there's this one story. So most people, I think, get it, or at least coming from a comics perspective and just kind of being immersed in this and editing it all the time, I get it. But then there's always people who don't understand that and that it's supposed to be literally true. And sometimes, on very rare occasions, it includes artists. So there's people like Susie who are reporting only things that they were there for.
Not only, but mostly.
Yeah, and then other people are recreating events, and so there are different ways of doing it. And I think as long as the artist is clear about what they're actually doing and not miscommunicating anything. So there was this piece we published on Cartoon Movement that was an interview with a scientist, and it was done by a journalist who took photo references, and then it was recreated by an artist who wasn't there. So during the process of editing this, the art was looking fine, and I Googled the guy, and he looked like he appeared in the artist's work, but he he was slightly different, but I figured maybe he just like shaved in between when his picture was taken and when this occurred. So I asked about it a little bit, and it turns out that the artist was drawing this guy with glasses and a goatee, and I said, does he look like that? And he goes, no, I wanted to make him look a little more interesting. He looked boring. And it's like, well, you can't do that because he doesn't have glasses. And if you read an article and it says, I was sitting in the room with President Bush, who was combing his mohawk, then you're lying and you're just making things up. And so that's the only person I really had trouble with. But yeah, we had to go in and Photoshop the glasses and the goatee off the guy, which the scientist himself found kind of amusing, and he said that he thought he looked better. But he did not look more accurate.
But you only caught that because you were fact-checking.
Yeah.
And I think there's a perception of like, well, how do you fact-check? How do you do this?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, it's the exact same as a prose piece, with there's just the addition of the visuals. And I mean, there's not a way to fact-check every single thing. I mean, I don't demand a photograph of every single drawing that's in a piece, because I think that would be ridiculous, and it's also not the way most artists work. I wish I would have included Wendy McNaughton's work in my slideshow, because I'm editing a piece from her right now. So Wendy McNaughton does comics journalism, and she only sketches on site. She doesn't take photo references and doesn't recreate things from memory. She goes to a thing that she's doing something on. In the case of what I'm editing, her and a writer for Wired, Angela Watercutter, who has a really cool last name, went into Folsom Prison and is doing a piece on their arts project, or their arts program. And as you can imagine, it's dwindling and underfunded and gives a few people hope and things like that. But you can't walk into a prison with your iPhone and take reference photos or a big camera on your back. But you can sit there and sketch. So that's an example of of creating something that you couldn't document really any other way, or at least without going through a little laborious process of getting them to allow a film crew in there. So that's like an example where I guess she could put glasses on someone to make them look cooler, and I might not be able to fact check that one, but I think I trust Wendy a little bit.
She is interesting to me because she is so obsessed with only being able to draw. She talks about only being able to draw from life and completely from life. Like, she couldn't draw a pack of cigarettes in her house to represent the pack of cigarettes that she saw on the table. Like, she had to go back to that table and put the pack of cigarettes on that table to draw it in that sense. But I think it's funny because she doesn't consider herself a journalist. Yeah,
well, I think then you could go down a hole where you discuss what is art and truth.
Right,
and that's, but that has been going on for hundreds of years. But in her case, I think it's interesting because if we're talking about representations of things, she's only drawing from the thing. She could get a much more realistic or photorealistic drawing by doing it later, but the drawings have a very sketchy sketchbook quality, for lack of a better word. But then she's capturing something that's there in that moment that is important, I think.
Okay. Great. That was great. Thank you, Susie, and thank you, Matt.